They told him he wasn't whole enough to be wanted, said a man in a chair couldn't build a life, couldn't earn respect, couldn't be loved. But Elias Crowe didn't come to Red Willow to beg for acceptance. He came to prove every single one of them wrong. And when the town tried to break him, he did something they never expected. He stayed, he fought, and he built something they couldn't tear down. This is his story, one of grit, fire, and the kind of courage that doesn't need legs to stand tall. If you want to see how far a man can go when the world says he's not enough, stay with me till the end. Hit that like button and drop a comment telling me what city you're watching from. I want to see how far this story travels. The train screeched into Red Willow just after noon, belching black smoke into a sky so wide it felt like it could swallow a man whole. Elias Crowe sat near the back of the passenger car, hands resting on the wheels of his chair, watching the town crawl into view through a window streaked with dust and finger smudges. It wasn't much to look at. Wooden storefronts, a crooked church steeple, streets carved into the dirt like scars. But it was supposed to be his. He'd written to her for 6 months. Caroline Shaw. She'd answered every letter with careful penmanship and cautious warmth, never quite promising, but never pulling away either. She knew about the chair. He'd told her in the second letter, laid it out plain so there'd be no shock, no trap. I lost my legs in a logging accident 4 years back. I get around fine. I work with my hands, furniture, repairs, metalwork. I'm not asking for pity, just a chance. She'd written back, I don't need a man who can run. I need one who can stay. That had been enough. The train lurched to a stop. Elias gripped the armrests and steadied himself as the other passengers shuffled toward the door, boots clomping on the floorboards. A couple glanced back at him, quick, awkward looks, but no one offered help. He didn't want it anyway. He'd learned early that if you waited for someone else to clear the path, you'd be waiting forever. He rolled himself to the narrow aisle, angled the chair sideways, and worked his way toward the exit. The conductor, a wiry man with a tobacco-stained mustache, appeared at the door and frowned. You need a hand? I need a ramp, Elias said. The conductor blinked. Ain't got one. Then I'll manage. It took 3 tries. The first time, the chair tipped backward, and he had to catch himself on the doorframe. The second time, one wheel caught on the edge of the step and he nearly pitched forward. The third time, he angled it just right, braced his arms, and eased himself down onto the platform. His shoulders burned. His hands were already sore, but he was down. He looked up. The platform was crowded. Families reuniting, traders hauling crates, a cluster of men in wide-brimmed hats smoking and talking low. And standing near the far end, under the shade of the station awning, was a woman in a dark blue dress, her hair pinned tight, her face pale and unsmiling. Caroline. Elias rolled toward her, weaving between trunks and travelers, his heart kicking hard against his ribs. She didn't move, didn't smile, just watched him approach with the kind of stillness that made his gut twist. He stopped a few feet away. Miss Shaw? Her eyes flicked down to the chair, then back to his face. Mr. Crowe. Her voice was flat, cold. It's good to finally meet you, he said, keeping his tone steady. I know the journey was long, but I can't do this. The words hit him like a fist. He stared at her. What? She took a step back, her hands clasped in front of her like she was holding herself together. I thought I could. I really did. But seeing you now, She shook her head. You're not what I expected. You knew about the chair. I knew, but I didn't know. Her voice cracked, and for a second he thought she might cry, but she didn't. She just looked at him like he was something broken she couldn't fix. I need a man who can protect me, who can work a full day, who can... She stopped, swallowed. You're not whole. The platform seemed to tilt. Elias felt the stares of everyone around them, felt the weight of their curiosity and pity pressing down like a boot on his chest. I work harder than most men with legs, he said quietly. I'm sure you do. She took another step back. But I can't marry you. I'm sorry. She turned and walked away, her skirt sweeping the platform, and Elias sat there in the middle of the crowd, the sun beating down on his head, his hands gripping the armrest so hard his knuckles went white. Someone laughed. Not loud, but loud enough. A man near the station door, grinning behind his hand, nudging his friend. A woman whispered something and shook her head, her expression caught between pity and disgust. Elias didn't move, didn't speak. He just sat there, feeling the humiliation soak into his skin like rain into wood. Then he turned the chair around and rolled back toward the train. The conductor was still there, leaning against the car, picking his teeth with a splinter. He glanced at Elias and raised an eyebrow. That didn't take long. When's the next train out? Tomorrow morning, 6 sharp. Elias nodded. Tomorrow. He could survive one night. Find a boarding house, keep his head down, get out of this town before anyone remembered his name. But as he rolled past the edge of the platform, something stopped him. It wasn't pride. It wasn't hope. It was something meaner, harder, a stubborn refusal to let her be right, to let any of them be right. He turned the chair and looked back at the town, at the crooked streets and the raw buildings and the people moving through it like ants on a hill. It was ugly and rough, and it didn't want him. Good. He'd stay anyway. Tick. The boarding house was a squat 2-story building at the end of Main Street, its paint peeling and its sign hanging crooked. The woman who ran it, Mrs. Taggart, a heavy-set widow with a face like old leather, looked Elias up and down when he rolled through the door. "You got money?" "I got money. Room's $1 a week. No cooking in the rooms. No loud noise after 9. "That's fine." She led him down a narrow hallway to a room barely big enough for a bed and a washstand. The floor was uneven. The window didn't close all the way, but it was shelter. "You'll want to eat. There's a dining hall 2 doors down," she said, lingering in the doorway. "They serve till 7. "Appreciate it." She nodded, started to leave, then stopped. "You're the one from the train." Elias didn't answer. "Whole town's talking about it," she said, not unkindly. "Caroline Shaw turning you away like that." "Yeah, I figured." "She's a fool." He looked up, surprised. Mrs. Taggart shrugged. "Any woman who judges a man by what he's missing instead of what he's got is a fool," she said. "But this town's full of fools, so don't take it personal." She left, and Elias sat there in the dim little room, staring at the cracked plaster on the wall. He thought about leaving, about getting on that train in the morning and going back to St. Louis, back to the cramped workshop where he'd spent the last 4 years building chairs and tables for people who barely looked at him. It would be easier, safer, but easier didn't sit right, not anymore. He'd spent too long being invisible, too long letting people look past him, through him, like he was furniture. And maybe that was fine when he was just surviving, but he wasn't just surviving anymore. He was done being dismissed. The next morning, he didn't go to the train. Instead, he rolled into town, past the general store and the saloon and the barber shop, looking for work. Most places turned him away before he finished asking. A man at the lumberyard laughed in his face. The owner of the blacksmith shop told him he didn't hire cripples. But at the edge of town, near the dry goods store, he found a man struggling with a broken wagon wheel. The axle had snapped clean through, and the man, middle-aged, sunburned, cursing under his breath, was trying to prop the wagon up with a stack of crates that kept collapsing. Elias stopped. "You need a hand?" The man looked over, saw the chair, and frowned. "I need someone who can lift." "You need someone who can think," Elias said. "That axle's split down the grain. You try to prop it, it'll just snap again. You need to replace the whole thing." The man straightened, wiping his hands on his pants. "And I suppose you can do that?" "I can." The man studied him for a long moment, then shrugged. "All right, show me." Elias rolled closer, examined the brake, then nodded toward a pile of scrap wood near the store. "You got a saw and a chisel in there?" "Yeah." "Get 'em." It took 2 hours. Elias cut a new axle from a piece of seasoned oak, shaped it with the chisel, and fitted it into place while the man held the wagon steady. When they lowered it back down, the wheel turned smooth. The man tested it, rolling the wagon back and forth, then grinned. "I'll be damned." "You're welcome," Elias said. The man pulled a coin from his pocket and handed it over. "What's your name?" "Elias Crowe." "Ben Holloway, you looking for work?" "I am." Ben nodded slowly. "Come by tomorrow. I run a freight line. Always something breaking. Pays fair." Elias pocketed the coin. "I'll be here." He rolled away feeling lighter than he had in months. Alaka. Word spread faster than he expected. By the end of the week, Elias had fixed a fence, repaired a stove, and built a custom set of shelves for a woman who ran a dress shop. People still stared, still whispered, but now when he rolled past, some of them nodded. It wasn't acceptance. Not yet. But it was something. One afternoon, while he was working on a broken gate behind the general store, a woman approached. She was older, maybe 40, with graying hair pulled back in a bun and a face that looked like it had seen too many hard winters. She wore a faded work dress and an apron stained with soap and water. "You're the one everyone's talking about," she said. Elias looked up. "Depends what they're saying. That you're good with your hands." She paused. "That you don't quit." "That's true enough." She nodded toward the street. "I run a laundry a few blocks over. Got a ringer that's been busted for 2 weeks. Every handyman in town's either too busy or wants more than I can pay. What's it worth to you? $3 if you can fix it, 2 if you can't, but you try." Elias smiled. Deal. Her name was Martha Hale, and her laundry was a converted barn at the edge of town, its walls thin and its roof patched with mismatched shingles. Inside, steam rose from enormous tubs, and sheets hung from lines strung across the rafters. The air smelled like lye and wet fabric. The ringer was a beast, an old iron contraption with wooden rollers that had cracked and split under the pressure. Elias examined it, tested the gears, then looked up at Martha. "This is older than I am." "Older than both of us," she said dryly. "Can you fix it?" "I can try." It took the rest of the afternoon. He had to carve new rollers from a piece of hickory, sand them smooth, and fit them into the frame without cracking the iron. Martha worked around him, hauling wet laundry, scrubbing stains, wringing out sheets by hand. She didn't talk much, but she didn't ignore him either. She asked questions: where he was from, how long he'd been in Red Willow, whether he planned to stay. He answered carefully. He'd learned that people in frontier towns didn't trust outsiders, especially ones who showed up alone and uninvited. But Martha didn't seem suspicious, just curious. When he finally got the ringer working again, she tested it, feeding a sheet through the rollers and watching it come out flat and dry on the other side. "Well," she said, "I'll be damned." Elias wiped his hands on a rag. "That'll be $3. She paid him without complaint, then handed him an extra $1 for working past sundown. That wasn't part of the deal. It is now. He took the money, nodded his thanks, and rolled toward the door. But before he left, he paused. "If something else breaks," he said, "you know where to find me." Martha smiled. It was small, but it was real. "I'll remember that." Fonts. The weeks passed. Elias took every job he could find, no matter how small. He fixed doors, built crates, sharpened tools, patched roofs. He worked long hours, his hands blistered and his shoulders aching, but he didn't stop. Every job was proof. Every finished piece was an answer to the people who said he couldn't. And slowly, painfully, the town began to shift. Not everyone. There were still men who sneered when he rolled past, women who whispered behind their hands. But there were others. Ben Halloway, who kept hiring him for freight work. Mrs. Taggart, who started charging him less for rent. A few shop owners who nodded when he passed. And Martha. She hired him 3 more times that month, and each time they talked a little longer. He learned she'd been widowed 5 years ago, that her husband had died of fever, that she'd been running the laundry alone ever since. She learned he'd been a carpenter before the accident, that he'd lost his legs to a tree that fell the wrong way, that he'd taught himself to work from the chair because the alternative was starving. They didn't talk about Caroline. Didn't need to. But one evening, as Elias was packing up his tools, Martha said, "You know, when I first heard about what happened at the station, I thought you'd be gone in a day." Elias looked up. "You and everyone else." "But you stayed." "Didn't have anywhere better to go." She shook her head. "That's not why." He didn't argue, because she was right. It was late October when everything changed. Elias was working in Ben's freight yard, repairing a cracked wagon tongue, when a man he didn't recognize walked up. He was tall, well-dressed, with a trimmed beard and boots so clean they looked new. He carried himself like someone used to being listened to. "You're Elias Crowe," the man said. "That's right. My name's Victor Lloyd. I own the Mercantile on Main Street." Elias had seen the place, a big, well-stocked store that seemed to sell everything from nails to fine cloth. He'd never been inside.
"What can I do for you?" Elias asked. Lloyd smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. "I've been hearing about you. People say you're good at fixing things." "I do my best." "I'm sure you do." Lloyd glanced around the yard, then back at Elias. "I wanted to meet you. Make sure you understand how things work in Red Willow." Elias set down his tools. "I'm listening."
"This town's built on trust," Lloyd said. "People rely on each other. They do business with people they know. People who've been here. People who belong. And I don't belong. Not yet." Lloyd's smile widened. "But you could, if you're smart about it." Elias waited. "Stay in your lane," Lloyd said quietly. "Do your repairs. Keep your head down. Don't make waves. And maybe, in time, people will stop seeing you as the man who got dumped at the station." Elias felt his jaw tighten. "And if I don't?" Lloyd's smile faded. "Then you'll find out how small this town really is." He turned and walked away, his boots crunching on the gravel. Ben Holloway appeared a moment later, frowning. "What do you want?" "To put me in my place," Elias said. Ben spat into the dirt. "Lloyd's a snake. Owns half the businesses in town. Thinks that makes him king. You cross him, he'll make your life hell." "Then I guess I'll stay out of his way." Ben looked at him. "You sure about that?" Elias picked up his tools and got back to work. "No." 2 days later, Martha's laundry burned. Not to the ground, just the back wall, where the stove sat. But it was enough. The fire started in the middle of the night, and by the time someone saw the smoke and raised the alarm, half the wall was gone. Martha stood in the street, wrapped in a shawl, watching the flames with a face like stone. Elias found her there at dawn, soot-streaked and silent. "What happened?" he asked. "Stovepipe came loose," she said. Her voice was flat, empty. Sparks caught the wall. "You checked the pipe last week?" "I did. It was fine." Elias looked at the wreckage, then back at her. "You sure it came loose on its own?" She didn't answer, but her jaw tightened, and Elias knew. "Lloyd," he said, "I don't know that." "But you think it." She looked at him, her eyes red-rimmed and hard. "What does it matter? I can't prove it. And even if I could, no one would believe me. He owns half this town." "Not all of it. Enough." Elias stared at the burned wall, at the blackened beams and the curling smoke, and something cold and sharp settled in his chest. "I'll help you rebuild," he said. Martha shook her head. "I can't pay you." "I didn't ask you to." She looked at him for a long moment, then nodded. They started that afternoon. The rebuilding took longer than either of them expected. The burned wall had to be torn down completely, the charred beams hauled away, and replaced with fresh lumber that cost more than Martha could afford. Elias worked through the mornings and into the evenings, measuring, cutting, fitting each board into place while Martha kept the laundry running with half the space and twice the effort. She didn't complain, didn't ask him to slow down or take a break. She just worked alongside him, hauling water, scrubbing stains, hanging sheets that dried stiff in the cold October air. Sometimes they talked, sometimes they didn't. But the silence between them wasn't awkward. It was the kind of quiet that came from two people who understood work, who knew that some things didn't need words. On the third day, a man showed up at the laundry door. He was young, maybe 25, with a narrow face and nervous hands that kept fidgeting with the brim of his hat. He looked at Elias, then at Martha, then back at Elias like he wasn't sure who to address. "Help you?" Martha asked. The man cleared his throat. "I'm looking for Elias Crowe." Elias set down his hammer. "That's me. My name's Tom Ritter. I work at the freight office." He paused, shifting his weight. "Mr. Lloyd sent me." Elias felt his stomach tighten. "What's he want?" Tom glanced at Martha, then back at Elias. "He says you're trespassing on private property. Says this building's in violation of town ordinances and needs to be inspected before any repairs continue." Martha's face went hard. "This building's been here for 8 years. There's no ordinance." "There is now," Tom said quietly. "Passed last week. All commercial structures need to meet new fire safety standards. Mr. Lloyd's the inspector." "Of course he is," Elias muttered. Tom looked uncomfortable. "Look, I'm just delivering the message. He wants to see you both at the Mercantile tomorrow morning, 9 o'clock. And if we don't show? Martha asked. Tom didn't answer. He just put his hat back on and left. Martha stood there, staring at the half-rebuilt wall, her jaw clenched so tight Elias could see the muscle jump. He's not going to let this go, she said. No, Elias agreed. He's not. She turned to him, her eyes tired. You don't have to be part of this. He's coming after me, not you. You sure about that? She didn't answer because they both knew the truth. Lloyd didn't care about fire codes or inspections. He cared about control. And Elias had already broken the first rule. He hadn't stayed in his lane. I'll be there tomorrow, Elias said. Martha nodded slowly. Then I guess we both will. The mercantile was crowded when they arrived. Not with customers, with people who'd come to watch. Word had spread fast, the way it always did in small towns, and by 9 o'clock there were at least 24 men and women clustered near the front counter, pretending to shop while they waited for the show. Victor Lloyd stood behind the counter, dressed in a crisp shirt and vest, his beard freshly trimmed. He smiled when he saw them, the kind of smile a cat gives a mouse. Miss Hale, Mr. Crowe, thank you for coming. Martha didn't return the smile. Let's get this over with. Lloyd pulled out a sheet of paper and set it on the counter. As I'm sure Mr. Ritter explained, the town council has enacted new safety regulations for all commercial buildings. Your laundry, unfortunately, does not meet the current standards. What standards? Martha asked. Lloyd tapped the paper. Proper ventilation, reinforced walls, adequate fire suppression equipment. The list goes on. My building was fine until someone torched it, Martha said, her voice sharp. The room went quiet. Lloyd's smile didn't falter. That's a serious accusation, Miss Hale. Do you have proof? Do you? Lloyd leaned back, folding his arms. I have a responsibility to this town, to ensure that businesses operate safely. If your building doesn't meet the standards, it can't operate. Simple as that. How much? Elias asked. Lloyd looked at him. Excuse me? How much to bring it up to code? Lloyd glanced at the paper, then back at Elias. I'd estimate around $300. Maybe more. Martha went pale. Elias felt his hands tighten on the armrests. That's robbery, he said. That's the law, Lloyd replied smoothly. Of course, if Miss Hale can't afford the repairs, I'd be happy to buy the property. I'll give you a fair price, say $50. $50 for a building worth 10 times that? Martha said, her voice shaking with anger. Lloyd shrugged. It's worth what someone's willing to pay. And right now, I'm the only buyer. Elias stared at him, at the smug certainty in his face, and felt something dark and cold settle in his chest. This wasn't about safety. It wasn't even about money. It was about power, about making sure people like Martha, people like him, knew their place. We're not selling, Elias said. Lloyd raised an eyebrow. Excuse me? You heard me. We're not selling. Lloyd's smile faded. Mr. Crowe, I don't think you understand the situation. Miss Hale can't afford the repairs. She can't operate without meeting the code. And if she tries, I'll have the marshal shut her down. Then shut it down, Elias said. But we're still not selling. The room was dead silent. Lloyd's face darkened, his jaw tightening. You're making a mistake, he said quietly. Probably, Elias agreed. But it's my mistake to make. He turned the chair and rolled toward the door. Martha followed, her face flushed, her hands shaking. They didn't speak until they were outside, halfway down the street. That was stupid, Martha said. Yeah. He's going to come after us harder now. I know. She stopped walking and looked at him. Why did you do that? Elias met her eyes. Because he doesn't get to win just because he's loud. Martha stared at him for a long moment, then shook her head. But she was smiling, just a little. You're out of your mind, she said. Probably. They went back to the laundry and kept working. The next week was brutal. Lloyd made good on his threat. He sent the town marshal, a grain man named Calloway, to shut down the laundry until the repairs were complete. Martha argued, shouted, even threatened to take it to the territorial court, but Calloway just shrugged and nailed a notice to the door. I'm sorry, Miss Hale. I don't make the rules. No, she said bitterly. You just follow them. With the laundry closed, Martha had no income. She started taking in mending work, sewing late into the night by candlelight, but it wasn't enough. Elias kept working, fixing wagons, building shelves, sharpening tools, but half the town had stopped hiring him. Lloyd's influence ran deep, and people were scared. Scared of losing their businesses, their livelihoods, their standing in a town that already felt too small to breathe in. But not everyone was scared. Ben Holloway kept hiring him. Mrs. Taggart started spreading word that Elias was the best carpenter in Red Willow, even if he worked from a chair. A few shop owners quietly slipped him jobs, paying in cash and asking him not to mention where the work came from. And one afternoon, while Elias was repairing a fence behind the general store, a woman approached him. She was younger than Martha, maybe 30, with dark hair and a face that looked like it had been pretty once but had hardened with time. "You're Elias Crowe," she said. "That's right." "I'm Rebecca Tate. I run the boarding house on 5th Street. Elias nodded. He'd seen the place. A narrow building with peeling paint and sagging shutters. "I've got a problem," Rebecca said. "Back steps are rotting out. Had 3 men look at it, and they all said it'd cost more than I can pay." "What can you pay?" $10. "Maybe 12 if you can do it fast." Elias looked at her. "That's barely enough to cover materials." "I know." She hesitated. "But I heard you're good, and I heard you don't turn people away just because they can't afford much." Elias thought about it, then nodded. "I'll take a look." The steps were worse than she'd described. The wood was soft with rot, the nails rusted through. The whole structure tilted like it might collapse under its own weight. It would take at least 2 days to rebuild, maybe 3. But he said yes anyway. Rebecca watched him work for a while, then asked, "You really going up against Lloyd?" Elias didn't look up. "I'm not going up against anyone. I'm just trying to make a living." "That's not what people are saying." "People say a lot of things." She was quiet for a moment. "Lloyd owns my building. He raises the rent every year, and if I complain, he threatens to evict me. Half the people in this town are in the same boat." "Then why don't you fight back?" Rebecca laughed, but there was no humor in it. "With what? He's got money, connections, the ear of every official in town. What do I have?" Elias set down his hammer and looked at her. "You've got a voice." "A voice doesn't pay rent." "No," Elias said, "but it's a start." She didn't answer, just shook her head and went back inside. But the next day, when Elias showed up to finish the steps, there was a basket waiting for him. Bread, cheese, and a jar of preserves. No note, but he knew who it was from. Guakikich. Martha's situation got worse. With the laundry shut down and no income coming in, she started falling behind on her own rent. The landlord, a sour-faced man who owned 3 buildings on the edge of town, came by twice in 1 week, demanding payment. "I don't have it yet," Martha told him, her voice tight. "Then you'd better find it," the landlord said. "I want 2 months' rent by the end of the week, or you're out." Elias was there when it happened, working on the last section of the wall. He watched the landlord leave, then turned to Martha. "How much do you owe?" $40. "I've got 20 saved. You can have it." Martha shook her head. "I can't take your money." "Why not?" "Because you need it as much as I do." "I'll manage." She looked at him, her eyes red-rimmed and tired. "Why are you doing this?" Elias didn't have a good answer. Or maybe he did, but he wasn't ready to say it out loud. So he just shrugged. "Because you didn't turn me away when everyone else did." Martha's throat worked, and for a second he thought she might cry. But she didn't. She just nodded. "Thank you," she said quietly. "Don't thank me yet. We've still got to figure out the other 20. On." The solution came from an unexpected place. 2 days later, Elias was working in Ben's freight yard when a man rode up on a dusty horse. He was older, maybe 50, with a weathered face and clothes that looked like they'd been worn hard for years. He dismounted and walked straight to Elias. "You the one they call Crowe?" "That's me." The man nodded. "Name's Henry Voss. I've got a ranch about 10 miles south of here. Heard you're good with your hands." "I do my best." "I need a new gate built, big one, strong enough to hold back 100 head of cattle. Can you do it?" Elias thought about it. A gate that size would take time. Maybe a week, maybe more. But it would pay well. "How much?" he asked. $60. Half up front, half when it's done. Elias felt his chest tighten. $60. More than enough to cover Martha's rent and still have some left over. "I'll do it," he said. Voss handed him $30 in cash. "I'll need it done in 2 weeks. That a problem?" "No problem." Voss nodded, climbed back on his horse, and rode off. Elias stared at the money in his hand, then rolled over to where Ben was loading crates. "You know anything about Henry Voss?" he asked. Ben glanced up. "Runs a cattle operation south of town. Keeps to himself mostly. Why?" "He just hired me to build a gate." Ben raised an eyebrow. "That's good money."
"Yeah." Elias hesitated. "You think Lloyd put him up to it?" "Voss?" Ben laughed. "Hell no. Voss hates Lloyd, tried to buy land from him 5 years back, and Lloyd jacked up the price so high Voss told him to go to hell. If Voss hired you, it's because he wants the work done, not because someone told him to." Elias felt some of the tension ease. "Good to know. You gonna take it?" "Already did." Ben grinned. "Then you'd better get started."
Building the gate meant spending long days out at Voss's ranch, working in the cold wind and the thin autumn sun. The ranch was rough, just a main house, a barn, and a few corrals, but it was solid, built to last. Voss didn't talk much, but he wasn't unfriendly. He'd bring Elias water, check on the progress, and nod approvingly when things were going well. The work was hard. The gate had to be 12 feet wide, reinforced with iron brackets, hung on hinges strong enough to support the weight without sagging. Elias worked through blisters and aching shoulders, fitting each piece with the kind of precision that didn't allow for mistakes. On the 4th day, Voss sat down on a fence rail and watched him work. "You're better than I expected," Voss said. Elias didn't look up. "Thanks. Most men would have given up by now. Gate this size, working alone from a chair. Hell, I wouldn't have blamed you if you'd said no." "I don't say no to work." Voss was quiet for a moment. "Heard what happened with Lloyd. Heard he's trying to run you out of town." "He's trying." "You gonna let him?" Elias stopped, looked up. "What do you think?" Voss smiled a slow, hard smile. "I think Lloyd's about to find out what happens when he picks a fight with someone who doesn't scare easy." He stood up and walked back to the house, leaving Elias alone with the gate and the wind. By the end of the week, Elias had finished the frame and started on the hinges. He brought the last section back to town to finish in Ben's yard, working late into the evening under the light of a lantern. He was so focused on the work that he didn't notice Martha until she spoke. "You've been out at Voss's place all week." He looked up, surprised. She was standing at the edge of the yard, her shawl pulled tight against the cold. "Didn't mean to worry you," he said. "I wasn't worried, just wondering." He set down his tools and wiped his hands. "Needed the money." She nodded. "I heard. $60 for a gate. Half up front." She looked at him, her expression unreadable. "You didn't have to do that." "Do what?" "Take a job that hard just to help me." Elias shrugged. "Wasn't just for you. I need the money too." "Don't lie to me, Elias." He met her eyes and saw something there, something raw and honest that made his chest tighten. "All right," he said quietly. "It was for you." "Partly." Martha looked away, her throat working. "I don't know what to say." "You don't have to say anything." She was quiet for a long time. Then she stepped closer, close enough that he could see the exhaustion in her face, the lines around her eyes. "I've been alone a long time," she said. "I forgot what it felt like to have someone care." Elias didn't know what to say to that, so he just reached out and took her hand. Her fingers were cold, rough from years of hard work, and they trembled slightly in his. "You're not alone," he said. She squeezed his hand just once, then let go and walked away. But the next morning, when he showed up at the laundry to finish the wall, there was coffee waiting for him. Hot, strong, and sweetened just the way he liked it. He didn't ask, just drank it and got to work. Briquet. The gate was finished 2 days early. Elias hauled it out to Voss's ranch on a borrowed wagon, installed the hinges, and tested it twice to make sure it swung smooth. Voss inspected it, nodded, and handed over the second half of the payment. "You do good work, Crowe." "Appreciate it." Voss hesitated, then said, "If you ever need anything, and I mean anything, you let me know. I don't forget people who do right by me." Elias pocketed the money. I'll remember that. He rode back to town feeling lighter than he had in weeks. He paid Martha's landlord the full $40, gave Mrs. Taggart his rent, and still had enough left over to buy materials for the last repairs on the laundry. But when he rolled up to the laundry that evening, something was wrong. The door was open. The inside was dark. He called out, "Martha?" No answer. He rolled inside and found her sitting on the floor near the stove, her face buried in her hands. The wringer, the one he'd spent hours repairing, was smashed. The rollers were split, the frame bent, the gears torn out and scattered across the floor. Elias felt his blood go cold. What happened? Martha looked up, her face streaked with tears. They came last night. 2 men. I didn't see their faces. They broke in, smashed the wringer, and left. Did you tell the marshal? She laughed bitterly. I tried. He said it was probably just drifters. Said there was nothing he could do. Elias stared at the wreckage, his hands clenched into fists. Lloyd, he said, I can't prove it. You don't have to. Martha stood up, wiping her eyes. What are you going to do? Elias looked at her, then at the broken wringer, then back at her. I'm going to fix it, he said, and then I'm going to end this. It took him 3 days to rebuild the wringer. He worked without stopping, barely sleeping, his hands raw and bleeding from the cold and the rough wood. Martha tried to help, but he sent her away. This was his fight now. On the 3rd night, as he was finishing the last gear, Ben Halloway showed up. Heard what happened, Ben said. Elias didn't look up. Word travels fast. Always does, Ben paused. You need help? I'm managing. Ben crouched down next to him. Look, Crowe, I like you. You're a good worker, and you've got more guts than most men I know. But Lloyd's not going to stop. He'll keep coming at you until you break or leave. And if you push back, he'll make sure you regret it. Elias set down his tools. What are you saying? I'm saying maybe it's time to cut your losses. Take what money you've got, get on a train, and start over somewhere else. Elias looked at him. You really think I'd do that? Ben sighed. No, but I had to try. Elias went back to work. Ben watched for a moment, then stood up. For what it's worth, Ben said, I hope you win. Me too. Ben left, and Elias kept working. By dawn, the wringer was done. He tested it, adjusted the gears, tested it again. It worked. Not perfect, but good enough. He found Martha asleep in a chair near the door, wrapped in a blanket. He didn't wake her, just covered her with his coat and rolled outside. The sun was just starting to rise, casting long shadows across the empty street. The town was quiet, peaceful, but Elias knew it wouldn't last. Lloyd had drawn the line, and now it was Elias's turn to cross it. Elias found Lloyd at the Mercantile just after opening, standing behind the counter with a ledger open in front of him. The store was empty except for a clerk stocking shelves in the back. Lloyd looked up when Elias rolled through the door, and his expression shifted. Surprise first, then something colder. Mr. Crowe, Lloyd said, setting down his pen. I didn't expect to see you here. I'm sure you didn't. Lloyd straightened, folding his hands on the counter. If you've come to apologize for your behavior last week, I'm willing to listen. I'm not here to apologize. Then what do you want? Elias rolled closer, stopping a few feet from the counter. His heart was pounding, but his voice came out steady. I want you to leave Martha Hale alone. Lloyd's mouth twitched. Not quite a smile, but close. Miss Hale's situation is unfortunate, but it's not my concern. If she can't meet the town's safety standards, you had her wringer smashed, Elias said flatly. You sent men to break into her laundry and destroy her equipment. Lloyd's eyes narrowed. That's a serious accusation. Do you have proof? I don't need proof. We both know what you did. Lloyd leaned back, crossing his arms. Let me give you some advice, Mr. Crowe. In this town, words matter. And making accusations you can't back up is a good way to find yourself in a lot of trouble. Is that a threat? It's a fact. Lloyd's voice was calm, almost pleasant. You've been here, what, 2 months? You think that gives you the right to walk into my store and accuse me of crimes? You think anyone in this town is going to believe you over me? Elias held his gaze. I think people are tired of being afraid of you. Lloyd laughed. It was a short, sharp sound like breaking glass. Afraid? Mr. Crowe, I employ half this town. I provide goods, services, credit. I keep Red Willow running. People aren't afraid of me. They depend on me. They depend on you because you've made sure they have no other choice. Lloyd's smile faded. Get out of my store. Not until you agree to leave Martha alone. Or what? Lloyd stepped around the counter, moving closer. He was taller than Elias, broader, and he knew it. What exactly are you going to do, Crowe? You can't even stand up. Elias felt the words hit like a slap, but he didn't flinch. You're right. I can't stand. But I can sit here all day and make sure every person who walks through that door knows exactly what kind of man you are. Lloyd stared at him, his jaw tight. Then he turned and called over his shoulder. Henry, get the marshal. The clerk in the back looked up, hesitated, then hurried out the side door. Lloyd turned back to Elias. You've got 5 minutes to leave before I have you arrested for trespassing. Then arrest me. You think I won't? I think you're used to people backing down, Elias said, and I'm not going to. Lloyd's face darkened. He stepped closer, close enough that Elias could smell the pomade in his hair, the faint scent of tobacco. You have no idea what you're doing.
Maybe not, but I'm doing it anyway. For a long moment, neither of them moved. Then the door opened and Marshal Calloway walked in, his face weary and resigned. He took one look at the two of them and sighed. What's going on here? This man is trespassing, Lloyd said. I want him removed. Calloway looked at Elias. That true? I came to talk, Elias said. He told me to leave. I said no. Calloway rubbed his face. Mr. Crowe, I don't want to arrest you, but if Mr. Lloyd asks me to remove you, I have to. Then do it. Calloway looked pained. Come on, son. Don't make this harder than it needs to be. Elias met his eyes. He had Martha Hale's equipment destroyed. You know it. I know it. And you're not doing anything about it. I can't act without proof. You mean you won't act because he owns you? Calloway's face flushed. That's enough.
Is it? Elias looked at Lloyd, then back at Calloway. How many people in this town are too scared to speak up because they know you'll side with him no matter what? How many businesses has he shut down? How many lives has he ruined? Mr. Crowe, I'm not leaving until he agrees to stop. Lloyd's voice was ice. Marshal, remove him. Calloway hesitated, then nodded. All right, let's go. He reached for the chair, but Elias locked the wheels. Don't touch me.
Son, I don't want to drag you out of here. Then don't. Lloyd's smile returned, cold and satisfied. You see, Marshal, this is what happens when people forget their place. And that's when the door opened again. Martha walked in, her face pale but determined. Behind her were Ben Halloway, Mrs. Taggart, Rebecca Tate, and a handful of others, maybe 10 people in all. They spread out across the store, filling the space, and Lloyd's smile faltered. What is this? Lloyd demanded.
Martha stepped forward. We're here to witness. Witness what? Whatever happens next, Ben said, because we're done pretending we don't see what you're doing. Lloyd looked at Calloway. Marshal, clear my store, now. Calloway looked at the crowd, then at Lloyd, then back at the crowd. They're not causing trouble. They're trespassing. They're standing, Mrs. Taggart said flatly. Last I checked, that's not a crime. Lloyd's face went red. This is my property. I have the right to refuse service to anyone. Then refuse it, Martha said. Tell us to leave. Tell all of us. Let everyone see how you operate. Lloyd's jaw worked. He looked at each of them in turn, his eyes hard. And for a moment Elias thought he might actually do it. But then he seemed to realize what he was up against. Not just Elias, but a dozen people who'd finally decided they'd had enough. Fine, Lloyd said tightly. You want to make a scene? Go ahead. But when this is over, when you've all had your little moment of rebellion, you're going to remember who keeps this town running, and you're going to come crawling back. Maybe, Ben said, or maybe we'll figure out we don't need you as much as you think we do. Lloyd's eyes blazed, but he didn't respond. He just turned and walked to the back of the store, his boots echoing on the wooden floor. Calloway looked at Elias. You satisfied? Elias looked at Martha, at Ben, at the others who'd come to stand with him. Yeah, I'm satisfied. Good. Then let's all get out of here before this turns into something worse. They filed out into the street, the cold air hitting them like a wall. Elias stopped on the boardwalk and turned to Martha. You didn't have to do that. Yes, I did, she said. You stood up for me. It's only fair I return the favor. Ben clapped Elias on the shoulder. That was either the bravest thing I've ever seen or the dumbest. I'm not sure which. Little of both, Elias admitted. Mrs. Taggart shook her head, but she was smiling. You've got guts, Crowe. I'll give you that. Rebecca Tate lingered, her arms crossed. You know he's not going to let this go. I know. So what are you going to do? Elias looked back at the mercantile, at the big glass windows and the sign that read L. Lloyd's General Mercantile in bold letters. I'm going to keep working, keep living, keep proving him wrong. And if that's not enough, then I'll deal with it when it happens. They dispersed slowly, heading back to their jobs and their lives, and Elias rolled back toward the laundry with Martha beside him. Neither of them spoke for a while. The confrontation had left him shaky, adrenaline still buzzing in his veins. You scared him, Martha said finally. Elias glanced at her. I don't think Lloyd scares easy. Maybe not, but you made him blink. That's something. They reached the laundry and went inside. The wringer was still there, rebuilt and functional, and Martha ran her hand over the smooth wood. Thank you, she said quietly, for fixing this, for standing up to him, for everything. Elias didn't know what to say to that, so he just nodded. But that night, lying in his narrow bed at the boarding house, he couldn't sleep. He kept replaying the confrontation, the look on Lloyd's face, the way the crowd had filled the store. It had felt good, powerful even, but he knew it wasn't over. Men like Lloyd didn't back down. They regrouped. They found new angles, new ways to attack, and Elias had just painted a target on his back. The next 2 weeks were tense. Lloyd didn't make any overt moves, but his presence hung over the town like a storm cloud. Elias kept working, taking whatever jobs he could find, and slowly, cautiously, more people started hiring him. A schoolteacher needed shelves built. A farmer needed a wagon repaired. A woman on the edge of town needed her well fixed. Each job was small, but they added up. And more importantly, they meant people were willing to risk Lloyd's displeasure to work with him. Martha reopened the laundry, and business trickled back. Not everyone. Some customers stayed away, too afraid of what Lloyd might do, but enough to keep her afloat. She and Elias fell into a rhythm, working side by side, talking less but understanding more. There was a weight to the silence between them now, something unspoken but undeniable. One evening, after they'd finished cleaning up, Martha sat down on a crate and looked at him. Can I ask you something? Sure. Why didn't you leave? After Caroline turned you away? After Lloyd came after you, why are you still here? Elias thought about it. I don't know. Pride, maybe? Stubbornness? That's not an answer. He sighed. When I lost my legs, I spent a long time feeling like half a person, like I wasn't enough. And everywhere I went, people looked at me and saw the chair first, the man second, or they didn't see the man at all. Martha didn't interrupt. But here, Elias continued, even with all the trouble, even with Lloyd and the rejection and everything else, I've done things that matter. I've built things, fixed things, helped people. And for the first time in a long time, I don't feel like half a person anymore. Martha's eyes were bright. You were never half a person, Elias. I know that now. She reached out and took his hand, her fingers warm and rough. I'm glad you stayed. Me too. They sat there in the fading light, hands clasped, and for a moment everything else fell away. But the moment didn't last. Bang! The fire started 3 nights later. Elias woke to the smell of smoke and the sound of shouting. He rolled to the window and looked out, and his blood went cold. Flames were licking up the side of a building 2 blocks away, Rebecca Tate's boarding house. He dressed faster than he ever had, threw himself into the chair, and rolled out into the street. The night was chaos, people running with buckets, shouting, trying to form a line to the well. The fire had already consumed the back half of the building, and smoke poured from the broken windows. Elias spotted Rebecca standing in the street, her face streaked with soot and tears. Is everyone out? He shouted. I don't know, she screamed. I got most of them, but I can't find Jenny. She's on the 2nd floor. Elias looked at the building. The stairs were already engulfed. The front door was open, belching smoke. Which room? He demanded.
Second door on the right. Without thinking, Elias rolled toward the building. Someone grabbed his arm, Ben Holloway, his face frantic. What the hell are you doing? There's a kid in there. You can't.
Elias yanked his arm free and kept moving. The heat hit him like a wall as he reached the doorway, the smoke so thick he could barely see. He pulled his shirt up over his mouth and nose and pushed through. Inside, the air was scorching. The walls were blistering, the floor groaning under the weight of the flames. He could hear the fire roaring above him, could feel the heat pressing down. The stairs were gone, collapsed into a burning heap, but there was a support beam still standing, angled like a ramp. Elias grabbed it and hauled himself up, using his arms and the wheels of the chair to climb. His hands burned. His lungs screamed. But he didn't stop. He reached the second floor and rolled down the hallway, calling out, "Jenny, where are you?" A small voice answered, choked and terrified. "Here." He followed the sound to the second door, shoved it open. The room was filled with smoke, and in the corner, huddled under a blanket, was a girl no older than 8. Elias rolled to her, grabbed her arm. "Come on." She was frozen, too scared to move. "Look at me," Elias said, his voice sharp. "We're leaving, right now." He pulled her onto his lap, wrapped his arms around her, and turned the chair. The hallway was worse now, flames crawling across the ceiling, the floor starting to buckle. He moved as fast as he could, the chair bouncing over debris, the girl clutching his shirt and sobbing. The beam was still there, but it was burning now, the wood blackened and cracking. Elias didn't hesitate. He angled the chair, braced himself, and slid down, the wheels skidding on the charred wood. The beam snapped halfway down, and they dropped the last few feet, hitting the ground hard. Elias felt something in his shoulder give, a sharp, tearing pain, but he didn't stop. He pushed through the doorway and out into the street, and hands reached for them, Ben, Martha, others, pulling the girl away, dragging Elias back from the building. He collapsed on the dirt, coughing, his chest heaving. The girl was crying, but she was alive. People crowded around her, wrapping her in blankets, checking her for burns. Martha knelt beside Elias, her face white. "Are you out of your mind?" He tried to answer, but his lungs wouldn't cooperate. He just coughed and nodded. Someone brought water. Someone else brought a blanket. And slowly, as the fire brigade finally got the flames under control, Elias started to breathe again. Rebecca pushed through the crowd, tears streaming down her face. She dropped to her knees beside him. "You saved her," she whispered. "You saved my Jenny." Elias didn't know what to say, so he just nodded. Ben crouched down next to him, his face grim. "That was the stupidest thing I've ever seen." "Probably. Also the bravest." Elias looked at the burning building, at the crowd gathered around, at the little girl wrapped in blankets and clinging to her mother. Someone had to. And then, through the smoke and the noise and the chaos, Elias saw him. Victor Lloyd standing at the edge of the crowd, his face shadowed, his eyes fixed on Elias. Their gazes locked and Lloyd's expression was unreadable. But there was something in it, something that looked almost like fear. Then he turned and walked away, disappearing into the night. Chet. The next morning, the town was different. Word of what Elias had done spread fast, carried from door to door, house to house, like wildfire. By noon, people Elias had never met were stopping him in the street to shake his hand, to thank him, to tell him he was a hero. He hated it, hated the attention, the way they looked at him like he'd done something extraordinary. He'd just done what needed doing, nothing more. But Martha saw it differently. "You changed things last night," she said, sitting across from him in the laundry. "People saw what you're made of. They saw a man who got lucky. No, they saw a man who didn't hesitate, who didn't think about himself, who risked everything for a child he didn't even know." She leaned forward. "That matters, Elias, more than you realize." He didn't argue, but he couldn't shake the memory of Lloyd's face, the way he'd looked at him before walking away. That afternoon, Calloway stopped by the laundry. He looked uncomfortable, his hat in his hands. "Mr. Crowe, Miss Hale, got a minute?" "What do you want, Marshal?" Martha asked, her tone cool. Calloway glanced around, then lowered his voice. "I wanted to tell you, off the record, that I'm looking into the fire at Rebecca's place." "And?" Elias said. "And it wasn't an accident. Someone doused the back wall with kerosene, lit it on purpose. Elias felt his jaw tighten. Lloyd. Calloway held up a hand. I can't prove that, but I'm working on it. Why are you telling us this? Calloway looked at him, and for the first time, Elias saw something in the marshal's eyes that looked like shame. Because I've been turning a blind eye too long. And what you did last night, it reminded me what this badge is supposed to mean. He put his hat back on and left. Martha looked at Elias. You think he means it? I don't know, but it's a start. Keeps. The town meeting was called 2 days later, held in the old community hall on the north side of town. It was packed, standing room only, people pressed shoulder to shoulder, the air thick with tension. Victor Lloyd stood at the front, calm and composed, his hands folded behind his back. Beside him was the mayor, a nervous man named Pritchard, who looked like he'd rather be anywhere else. Thank you all for coming, Lloyd began, his voice carrying over the crowd. I know the last few weeks have been difficult. Fires, accusations, unrest. It's not the Red Willow I know and love. Murmurs rippled through the room. I want to address the rumors, Lloyd continued. There are those who believe I've been acting in my own interest rather than the town's. I want to assure you that is not the case. Everything I do for the good of Red Willow. Then why'd you burn Rebecca's boarding house? Someone shouted. Lloyd's expression didn't change. I did no such thing, and I resent the accusation. Where were you the night of the fire? Ben called out. At home, asleep. Anyone verify that? Lloyd's eyes narrowed. I don't need to verify my whereabouts to you, Mr. Holloway. The room erupted. People shouting, arguing, some defending Lloyd, others accusing him. Pritchard banged a gavel, trying to restore order, but it was chaos. And then Elias rolled forward. The crowd parted, and the noise died down as he moved to the front of the room. Lloyd watched him approach, his face unreadable. You want to say something, Mr. Crowe? Lloyd asked. Yeah, I do. Elias turned to face the crowd. His heart was pounding, his hands slick with sweat, but his voice came out steady. I've been in Red Willow for 2 months. In that time, I've been rejected, threatened, sabotaged, and nearly run out of town, and every time the man behind it has been Victor Lloyd. Lloyd's face darkened. That's a lie. Is it? Elias looked at him. You tried to shut down Martha Hale's laundry with fake safety codes. You had her equipment destroyed. You've bullied half this town into submission, and when someone finally stands up to you, you burn their building down. I did no such thing. Then prove it, Elias said. Show us your books. Show us how much you charge for rent, for goods, for credit. Show us how you've used your position to control this town. Lloyd's jaw tightened. My business dealings are private. Not when they affect everyone here. The crowd murmured, and Elias saw heads nodding, people whispering. Lloyd stepped forward, his voice low and dangerous. You have no idea what you're doing, Crowe. I'm doing what someone should have done a long time ago, Elias said. I'm calling you out. For a moment, Lloyd looked like he might explode. But then he smiled, a cold, calculated smile. All right, he said. You want to see my books? Fine, I'll show them. And when you see that everything I've done has been fair and legal, you'll apologize. Publicly. Deal, Elias said. And when they show otherwise, you step down. You sell your holdings and leave Red Willow for good. Lloyd's smile widened. You're on. The room erupted again, and this time Pritchard couldn't restore order. But Elias didn't care. He'd drawn the line, and now there was no going back. The meeting broke up with no clear resolution, people filing out into the cold night air arguing and speculating. Elias rolled out behind them, exhausted, his shoulders still throbbing from the fire. Martha caught up with him on the boardwalk, her face tight with worry. That was reckless, she said. Probably. He's going to come after you harder now. I know. She stopped walking and grabbed the back of his chair, forcing him to stop too. I'm serious, Elias. You just backed him into a corner in front of the whole town. Men like Lloyd don't forgive that. I'm not asking for forgiveness. Then what are you asking for? He turned to look at her, and the street lamp cast shadows across her face, making her look older, harder. A fair fight. That's all I've ever wanted. Martha stared at him for a long moment, then let go of the chair. You're going to get yourself killed. Maybe, but at least I'll go down swinging. She didn't smile. That's not as comforting as you think it is. They walked back to the laundry in silence, the weight of what he'd done settling over both of them like a heavy blanket. When they reached the door, Martha paused. "Stay tonight," she said quietly. Elias looked at her, surprised. "What?" "Don't go back to the boarding house. Stay here. There's a cot in the back room. It's not much, but—" "Martha, I don't want you alone tonight," she said, her voice breaking slightly. "I don't trust Lloyd not to do something stupid." Elias wanted to argue, wanted to tell her he could take care of himself. But the truth was, he didn't want to be alone either, so he nodded. "All right." She let out a breath she'd been holding and led him inside. The back room was small and cluttered with supplies: soap, bleach, stacks of folded linens. The cot was narrow and lumpy, but it was warm. Martha brought him a blanket and a pillow, then lingered in the doorway. "Thank you," Elias said, "for everything." "Don't thank me yet. We don't know how this ends." "No, but we know how it starts." She smiled, just barely, then closed the door and left him alone. Elias lay on the cot, staring at the ceiling, his mind racing. He'd challenged Lloyd publicly, forced him into a position where backing down would mean losing face. But he'd also painted a target on his back bigger than anything before. And he had no idea what Lloyd's books would actually show. For all he knew, the man kept everything clean on paper, hiding the rot underneath layers of legal transactions and careful bookkeeping. But it didn't matter, because the challenge wasn't really about the books. It was about showing the town that Lloyd could be questioned, that his power wasn't absolute, that someone, somewhere, was willing to stand up and say no, even if that someone was a man in a chair who had no business picking fights with anyone. The next 3 days were tense. Lloyd made a show of gathering his records, announcing publicly that he was compiling everything for review. Pritchard appointed a committee to examine the books. 3 men, all business owners, all supposedly neutral. But Elias knew at least 2 of them owed Lloyd money, and the third was his cousin. "It's rigged," Ben said, sitting across from Elias in the freight yard. "They're not going to find anything." "Probably not." "Then why'd you agree to it?" Elias set down the axle he was repairing. "Because I'm betting Lloyd's smart enough to know that even if the books look clean, people are going to start asking questions. And once people start asking questions, they start seeing things they didn't see before." Ben shook his head. "You're either a genius or a fool. I haven't decided which." "Can I be both?" Ben laughed, but it was hollow. "You know what happens if this doesn't work, right? If the committee clears him and he comes out looking like the victim? I'll deal with it." "That's not an answer." Elias looked at him. "It's the only one I've got." Ben left, and Elias went back to work. But the conversation stayed with him. He'd gambled everything on a public confrontation, and if it didn't pay off, he'd lose more than respect. He'd lose whatever foothold he'd managed to carve out in this town. That evening, Martha found him at the laundry, working on a broken table she'd been meaning to fix for months. She watched him for a while, then sat down on a crate. "You didn't have to do this," she said. "Do what?" "Risk everything for me, for this town. You could have just kept your head down, done your work, stayed out of Lloyd's way." Elias didn't look up. "I tried that. Didn't work." "That's not what I mean." She paused. "You didn't owe me anything, Elias. You didn't owe any of us anything." He set down his tools and looked at her. "Maybe not, but I owed myself something." "What?" "Proof that I'm not just surviving anymore." Martha's eyes were bright in the lamplight. "You've been proving that since the day you got here. To you, maybe, but not to everyone, and not to myself." She reached out and took his hand, her fingers rough and warm. "You're the strongest man I know." Elias wanted to believe her, but strength felt like a fragile thing lately, like something that could crack under the right pressure. "I hope you're right," he said quietly. But the committee's findings were announced at another town meeting 4 days later. The hall was even more packed than before. People jammed into every available space, the air thick with anticipation and sweat. Elias sat near the front, Martha beside him, and he could feel the eyes of the entire town on his back. Lloyd stood at the front again, calm and composed, his ledgers stacked on the table beside him. The committee sat behind him, 3 men with serious faces and papers in their hands. Pritchard called the meeting to order, his voice shaky. The committee has completed its review of Mr. Lloyd's financial records, Pritchard said. Mr. Harwell, if you'd present the findings. Harwell was the oldest of the three, a dry goods merchant with thinning hair and wire-rimmed spectacles. He stood, cleared his throat, and began reading from a sheet of paper. After a thorough examination of Mr. Lloyd's accounts, we have found all transactions to be in compliance with territorial law. His pricing is consistent with market rates, his rental agreements are standard, and his credit terms are fair. A murmur ran through the crowd. Elias felt his stomach drop. Harwell continued, "We find no evidence of fraud, extortion, or any illegal activity. Mr. Lloyd's business practices, while aggressive, are within his rights as a property owner and merchant." The murmur grew louder. Some people looked relieved, others looked angry. Elias just felt numb. Lloyd stepped forward, his face the picture of wounded dignity. "I appreciate the committee's diligence, and I hope this puts to rest the unfounded accusations that have been leveled against me." He turned to look at Elias. "Mr. Crowe, I believe you owe me an apology." The room went silent. Every eye turned to Elias. He sat there, his hands gripping the armrests, his mind racing. He'd been wrong. Or at least, he couldn't prove he was right. Lloyd's books were clean, or clean enough, and now he was the one who looked like the troublemaker, the outsider who didn't know his place. But then Martha stood up. "What about the rent increases?" she said, her voice cutting through the silence. Harwell frowned. "I'm sorry?" "The rent increases," Martha repeated. "You said his rental agreements are standard, but I've been renting my building for 8 years and my rent's gone up 4 times in the last 3. That's not standard." Lloyd's expression tightened. "Market conditions change, Miss Hale. I adjust rates accordingly." "Market conditions or your whims?" Ben called out from the back. "I'd be happy to show you the comparable rates." "Then show us," someone else shouted. Lloyd looked around the room, and for the first time, Elias saw something flicker in his eyes. Not fear, exactly, but something close. Uncertainty. "This is not the time or place." "Why not?" Mrs. Taggart demanded. "You wanted to clear your name, so clear it. Show us those rates." Lloyd's jaw tightened. "I don't have them with me." "Convenient," Ben muttered. The room was shifting. Elias could feel it, the mood turning, the questions starting to pile up. People were no longer looking at Lloyd with deference. They were looking at him with suspicion. Elias rolled forward and the crowd parted. He stopped in front of the table, looking up at Lloyd. "You're right," Elias said. "I can't prove you've done anything illegal. Your books are clean, but that doesn't mean you're innocent." Lloyd's eyes narrowed. "That's slander. Is it? Or is it just the truth?" Elias looked around the room. "How many of you have had your rent raised in the last year? How many of you owe Lloyd money? How many of you are too scared to complain because you know he'll make your life hell if you do?" Hands started going up. Slowly at first, then more and more. Half the room, maybe more. Lloyd's face went red. "This is absurd. I run a business, not a charity." "No one's asking for charity," Elias said. "We're asking for fairness, and you've made damn sure this town doesn't have that." "I've built this town," Lloyd shouted, his composure finally cracking. "I've provided jobs, goods, services, things you people couldn't get anywhere else. And this is how you repay me? By listening to some crippled drifter who's been here all of 5 minutes?" The room went dead silent. Elias felt the word hit him like a punch, but he didn't flinch. He just held Lloyd's gaze. "You're right," Elias said quietly. "I am a drifter. I've been here 5 minutes. I don't own property, I don't have connections, and I can't stand up." He paused. "But I also don't lie. I don't cheat. And I don't hide behind a stack of ledgers when people ask me to be decent." Lloyd's face twisted. "Get out." "No." "I said get out." "Make me." Lloyd lunged forward, and for a second Elias thought the man might actually try to hit him. But Calloway stepped between them, his hand on Lloyd's chest. "That's enough," the marshal said firmly. Lloyd shoved him away. "Don't touch me." "Mr. Lloyd, I think it's time you left." Lloyd stared at Calloway, his face flushed, his breathing ragged. Then he looked at the crowd, at the faces watching him with a mix of shock and disgust, and something in him seemed to break. "Fine," he spat. "You want to turn on me? Go ahead. But when this town falls apart without me, don't come crawling back." He grabbed his ledgers and stormed out, the door slamming behind him. The room erupted, people shouting, arguing, some defending Lloyd, others condemning him. Pritchard banged his gavel uselessly, trying to restore order, but it was chaos. And in the middle of it all, Elias just sat there, his heart pounding, his hands shaking. Martha knelt beside him.
"Are you all right?" "Yeah," he said, though his voice was unsteady. "Yeah, I'm all right." Ben pushed through the crowd. "That was insane." "I know." "Also brilliant." Elias let out a shaky laugh. "I didn't plan it. Best plans never are." They helped him out of the hall and into the street, where the cold air hit him like a wall. He sucked in a breath, trying to steady himself. "You think it's over?" Martha asked. "No," Elias said, "not even close." He was right. 2 nights later, the mercantile burned. It started sometime after midnight, the flames visible from half the town. By the time the fire brigade arrived, the entire building was engulfed, the glass windows exploding from the heat, the roof collapsing in a shower of sparks. Lloyd stood in the street, watching it burn, his face blank. People gathered around, some trying to help, others just staring. When Calloway approached him, Lloyd didn't even look over. "Any idea how it started?" Calloway asked. Lloyd's voice was flat. "Does it matter?" "It might." Lloyd finally looked at him, and his eyes were empty. "It was Crowe." Calloway frowned. "What?" "Elias Crowe. He did this. He's been trying to destroy me since he got here, and now he's succeeded." "Mr. Lloyd, I don't think—" "Arrest him," Lloyd said. "Now." Calloway hesitated. "I can't arrest someone without proof." "I just gave you proof. He threatened me. He turned the town against me. And now my business is gone." "That's not how this works." Lloyd's face twisted with rage. "Then what good are you?" He turned and walked away, disappearing into the crowd. Calloway found Elias an hour later at the laundry. Martha answered the door, her face pale. "He didn't do it," she said before Calloway could speak. "I know." "Then why are you here?" "Because Lloyd's accusing him, and I need to hear it from Mr. Crowe himself." Elias rolled to the door. "I didn't burn his store, Marshal." "I believe you, but I need you to tell me where you were tonight. Here, sleep in the back room." "Can anyone verify that?" Martha stepped forward. "I can." Calloway looked at her, then at Elias. "All right, that's good enough for me." He paused. "But Lloyd's not going to let this go. He's convinced you're behind it." "Let him be convinced," Elias said. "I didn't do it, and he can't prove I did." Calloway nodded slowly. "For what it's worth, I think the fire was an accident. Probably a lamp left burning or a spark from the stove. But Lloyd's not in a rational state of mind right now. I noticed. Just be careful, both of you." He left and Martha closed the door. "This is getting out of control," she said. "I know." "What if he tries to hurt you?" Elias looked at her. "Then I'll deal with it." "That's not good enough. It's all I've got." She sat down on the crate beside him, her shoulders sagging. "I'm scared, Elias." "Me too." They sat there in the dim lamplight, neither of them speaking, and for the first time since he'd arrived in Red Willow, Elias felt the full weight of what he'd taken on. He'd come here looking for a new start, a chance to build something. And instead, he'd walked into a war. But he wasn't walking away. Not now. Not after everything. Bets. The next morning, the town woke to find Lloyd's mercantile reduced to a blackened shell. The shelves were gone, the goods destroyed, the structure barely standing. Lloyd himself was nowhere to be seen. Some said he'd left town. Others said he was holed up in his house, refusing visitors. But by noon, the rumors started spreading. Lloyd was claiming the fire was arson, that Elias had orchestrated it as revenge, that the whole thing was a conspiracy to drive him out of business. Elias heard the whispers as he rolled through town, saw the way some people looked at him, suspicious, uncertain. But he also saw others who nodded, who smiled, who stopped to shake his hand and thank him for standing up. The town was splitting, and Elias was stuck in the middle. That afternoon, he was working in Ben's yard when a stranger rode up.
The man was tall, clean-shaven, dressed in a suit that looked out of place on the frontier. He dismounted and walked straight to Elias. Elias Crowe? That's me. The man pulled a badge from his coat. I'm Deputy Marshal Harlan. Territorial Office sent me to investigate the fire. Elias set down his tools. I didn't do it. I didn't say you did. Harlan looked around the yard. But I'd like to ask you a few questions. They talked for half an hour. Harlan was thorough, asking about Elias's history with Lloyd, the confrontations, the town meeting, the fire at Rebecca's boarding house. Elias answered honestly, holding nothing back. When they were done, Harlan closed his notebook and looked at Elias. You've made quite an impression in this town. Not always a good one. No, Harlan agreed, but an honest one. I've talked to a dozen people today, and every one of them says the same thing. You're stubborn, reckless, and you don't know when to quit. But you're not a liar, and you're not an arsonist. Elias let out a breath he didn't know he'd been holding. So what happens now? I keep investigating. Talk to Lloyd, examine the site, see if I can figure out what actually happened. But between you and me... Harlan lowered his voice. I think the fire was an accident, and I think Lloyd's using it as an excuse to go after you. What do I do about that? Harlan shrugged. Stay out of his way. Let me do my job. And hope he comes to his senses before he does something stupid. He mounted his horse and rode off, leaving Elias alone in the yard. But Lloyd didn't come to his senses. 3 days later, Elias was working at the laundry when the door slammed open. Lloyd stood there, his face haggard, his clothes wrinkled, his eyes wild. You, he said, pointing at Elias, you destroyed everything. Elias stayed calm. I didn't burn your store, Lloyd. I don't care about the store, Lloyd shouted. I care about my reputation, my standing, everything I built, and you took it from me. I didn't take anything. You lost it yourself. Lloyd lunged forward and Martha stepped between them, her face fierce. Get out, she said. Lloyd ignored her, staring at Elias. You think you've won? You think because the town turned on me, you've beaten me? I wasn't trying to beat you, Elias said. I was just trying to live. Liar, Lloyd's voice was shaking. You came here to destroy me, from the start, and now you've got what you wanted. Mr. Lloyd, you need to leave, Martha said firmly. Lloyd finally looked at her, and something in his expression softened. I'm sorry, Miss Hale. I know you've been caught in the middle of this, but you need to understand, this man is dangerous. He's turned this town against itself. No, Martha said quietly. You did that when you put profit over people, when you used fear to control everyone. Elias just showed us we didn't have to be afraid anymore. Lloyd stared at her, his mouth working, and for a moment he looked like he might cry. Then his face hardened. Fine. You want him. You can have him. But when this town falls apart, when the businesses close and the money dries up, don't say I didn't warn you. He turned and walked out, slamming the door behind him. Martha let out a shaky breath and sat down. That was terrifying. You handled it. Barely. She looked at him. He's not going to stop, is he? No, but he's losing, and he knows it. She reached for his hand, and he took it, their fingers lacing together. What happens now? She asked. Now, Elias said, we wait, and we see if the town's ready to move forward without him. The answer came faster than either of them expected. The next week, a group of business owners met at the community hall. Ben was there, along with Mrs. Taggart, Rebecca Tate, and a dozen others. They talked for hours, arguing, debating, trying to figure out how to fill the void Lloyd had left. By the end of the meeting, they'd formed a cooperative, a way to pool resources, share costs, and support each other without relying on one person's control. It wasn't perfect, and it wouldn't be easy. But it was a start. Elias wasn't part of the meeting. He heard about it secondhand from Ben, who stopped by the laundry the next day. They want you to join, Ben said. Me? You're the one who started this, who showed them it was possible. Elias shook his head. I'm not a leader. Maybe not. But you're the reason the rest of us found our spines. Elias didn't know what to say to that. That evening, he and Martha sat outside the laundry, watching the sun set over the rough hills to the west. The air was cold, the sky streaked with orange and pink, and for the first time in weeks,
Elias felt something close to peace. You did it, Martha said quietly. Did what? Change things. Made this town better. Elias shook his head. I just made noise. You all did the rest.
She leaned against him, her head resting on his shoulder. Don't sell yourself short. They sat there in the fading light, and Elias thought about everything that had happened. The rejection, the fights, the fires, the people who'd turned away and the ones who'd stood by him, the fear and the hope and the stubborn refusal to quit. He'd come to Red Willow broken, looking for something he couldn't name, and somehow, in the middle of all the chaos, he'd found it. Not acceptance, not even respect, but belonging, and that was worth every scar. The weeks that followed felt like watching a town learn to breathe again. The cooperative took shape slowly, messily, with arguments over who contributed what and how profits should be shared, but it moved forward. Ben organized the freight contracts. Mrs. Taggart coordinated housing. Rebecca managed a communal fund for emergencies. And Martha, quietly but firmly, became the voice people listened to when disagreements got too heated. Elias stayed on the edges of it all, working his jobs, fixing what broke, building what was needed. He didn't want the spotlight, didn't need it, but people came to him anyway, asking advice, requesting repairs, sometimes just sitting with him while he worked and talking about nothing in particular. Lloyd, meanwhile, vanished. Some said he'd gone to the territorial capital to file complaints. Others said he'd taken what money he had left and headed east. His house stood empty, windows dark, the mercantile's charred skeleton a reminder of how quickly power could crumble when built on fear instead of trust. Deputy Marshal Harlan finished his investigation and ruled the fire accidental, a lamp knocked over, most likely by Lloyd himself in a fit of anger. No charges were filed, no one was blamed. And slowly, the town started to forget about Victor Lloyd entirely. But Elias couldn't forget. Not completely, because he understood something now that he hadn't when he'd first rolled off that train. Lloyd hadn't been evil. He'd been afraid. Afraid of losing control, of being irrelevant, of discovering that the town didn't need him as much as he needed it to need him. And that fear had turned him into exactly the kind of man people should be afraid of. It was a lesson Elias carried with him, tucked away like a bruise that still ached when pressed. One morning in early December, Martha found Elias in the workshop he'd set up in a corner of the laundry. He'd cleared out some storage space and built himself a proper workbench, complete with tool racks and a vise he'd salvaged from the burned mercantile. He was shaping a chair leg when she walked in, her arms crossed, her expression unreadable. "We need to talk," she said. Elias set down his plane. "That sounds ominous." "It's not. Or maybe it is. I don't know yet." She sat down on a stool across from him. "I got an offer yesterday from a man in Copper Ridge. He's opening a laundry service and he wants to buy my equipment, offering good money, enough to pay off my debts and still have some left over." Elias felt his chest tighten. "You thinking about taking it?" "I don't know. Maybe." She looked around the space at the walls they'd rebuilt together, the ringer he'd repaired 3 times now. "This place has been my whole life for 8 years, but it's also been a prison, working every day just to stay afloat, never getting ahead, always one disaster away from losing everything. And if you sell, then I'd be free. I could go somewhere else, start over, maybe find something easier." Elias forced himself to nod. "That makes sense." Martha looked at him, her eyes searching. "Would you come with me?" The question hung in the air between them, heavy and fragile. "Where would we go?" Elias asked quietly. "I don't know. Somewhere warmer, maybe. Somewhere that doesn't have winters like this." She paused. "Somewhere we could both start fresh." Elias thought about it, about leaving Red Willow, about walking away from the life he'd started to build here. It would be easier in some ways. No more Lloyd, no more whispers, no more proving himself over and over, just him and Martha and whatever future they could carve out together. But it would also mean giving up, and he'd spent too long refusing to give up to start now. "I can't," he said. Martha's face fell. "Why not?" "Because this is where I belong now. I didn't think it would be. Hell, I didn't even want it to be. But somewhere along the way, this place became mine, and I'm not ready to let that go." She looked away, blinking hard. "What about us? What about us? If I leave and you stay, Then you leave and I stay, Elias said gently, and we figure out what that means. Martha stood up abruptly. I need to think. She left before he could respond, and Elias sat there in the quiet workshop, surrounded by half-finished projects and the smell of sawdust, wondering if he'd just made the biggest mistake of his life. 2 days later, Caroline Shaw showed up at the laundry. Elias was working outside, repairing a broken hinge on the door when she approached. She looked different than he remembered, thinner, her face drawn, her dress faded. She stopped a few feet away, clutching her handbag like a shield. Mr. Crowe, she said. Elias looked up, surprised. Miss Shaw. She glanced around nervously. May I speak with you? I'm listening. She hesitated, then stepped closer. I wanted to apologize for what I said at the station, the way I treated you. It was cruel and unfair, and I've regretted it every day since. Elias set down his screwdriver. Why now? Because I've been watching you, watching what you've done here, how you stood up to Lloyd, how you helped people, how you... Her voice cracked. You proved me wrong about everything. Elias didn't know what to say to that, so he just nodded. Caroline took a breath. I know I have no right to ask this, but I was wondering if you might consider giving me another chance. I made a mistake, and I'd like to... No, Elias said. She blinked. What? I said no. He picked up his screwdriver again. I appreciate the apology, but I'm not interested. But I thought... You thought wrong. Elias looked at her. You rejected me because you saw the chair before you saw the man. And maybe you've changed your mind now because you've seen what I can do. But that's not enough. Because the man you see now is the same man who rolled off that train. And if you couldn't see that then, I don't trust you to see it going forward. Caroline's face flushed. I understand. I'm sorry for bothering you. She turned and walked away, her shoulders stiff, and Elias went back to work. He didn't feel triumphant, didn't feel vindicated. He just felt tired. Martha came out a few minutes later, having watched the whole thing from inside. That must have felt good, she said. Not really. No? Elias shook his head. She apologized because I proved I was worth something. But I shouldn't have to prove that to anyone. I was worth something the day I got here. I just didn't know it yet. Martha sat down on the step beside him. For what it's worth, I knew it. Did you? Maybe not right away, but pretty quick. She paused. I told the man from Copper Ridge I'm not selling. Elias looked at her. You sure? No, but I'm staying anyway. She smiled, small and uncertain. Because you're right. This is where we belong. Elias felt something loosen in his chest, something he hadn't realized was clenched tight. We? Yeah, we. She took his hand. If you'll have me, he squeezed her fingers. I'll have you. They sat there on the step, hands clasped, watching the town move around them, and for the first time since he'd arrived in Red Willow, Elias felt like he was exactly where he was supposed to be. Winter came hard that year. Snow piled up in the streets, turning the town into a maze of white drifts and frozen mud. The cooperative struggled through its first real test, coordinating supplies and labor when roads became impassable and tempers ran short. But they made it work. Barely. Sometimes. But they made it work. Elias stayed busy. He built sleds for kids, repaired stoves, reinforced roofs that sagged under the weight of snow. And at night, he went back to the laundry, where Martha had set up a small living space in the back room. It wasn't much. A bed, a stove, a table, and 2 chairs. But it was theirs. They didn't talk about marriage. Didn't need to. What they had was built on something stronger than vows. It was built on work, on trust, on the kind of partnership that came from surviving something together and coming out the other side still standing, or sitting, in Elias's case. One evening in late January, Ben stopped by with news. He looked excited, his face flushed from the cold. You're not going to believe this, he said, stomping snow off his boots. Try me, Elias said. Lloyd's back. Elias felt his stomach drop. What? Rode in this morning, checked into the boarding house, bold as brass. Word is he's planning to rebuild the mercantile. Martha's face went pale. Can he do that? Legally? Yeah, the land's still his, and if he's got the money...
Then we're right back where we started, Elias said quietly.
Ben shook his head. Not necessarily. The cooperative's up and running now. We've got our own supply lines, our own credit system. We don't need him like we used to. But he'll still be here, Martha said, still trying to control things. Maybe. Or maybe he's learned his lesson. Elias didn't believe that for a second, but he kept his mouth shut. The next day, Lloyd requested a meeting with the cooperative. It was held in the community hall, with all the key members present: Ben, Martha, Mrs. Taggart, Rebecca, and a handful of others. Elias came too, rolling in at the back, trying to stay out of sight. Lloyd stood at the front, looking older than Elias remembered. His suit was clean but worn, his face drawn. He didn't have the same commanding presence he'd had before. He just looked tired. "Thank you for agreeing to see me," Lloyd began. "I know I don't deserve your time, but I'm asking for it anyway." The room was silent. "I came back to Red Willow because this is my home," Lloyd continued. "I was born here. I built my business here. And when I lost it, I realized I'd lost the only thing that mattered to me." He paused. "But I also realized I lost it because of my own actions, because I put profit over people, control over community. And I'm sorry for that." Mrs. Taggart crossed her arms. "What do you want, Lloyd?" "I want to rebuild, but not the way I did before. I want to be part of the cooperative, contribute what I can, take what I need, and let the rest of you decide how things should run." Ben frowned. "Why should we trust you?" "You shouldn't," Lloyd said bluntly. "I've done nothing to earn it, but I'm asking for the chance to try." The room erupted in whispers. Some people looked skeptical. Others looked outright hostile. Elias watched Lloyd's face, looking for signs of manipulation, of hidden motives, but all he saw was exhaustion. Martha stood up. "If we let you join, you follow the same rules as everyone else. No special treatment, no exceptions." Lloyd nodded. "Agreed. And if you break those rules, you're out. No second chances." "Understood." Ben looked around the room. "Anyone object?" A few hands went up, but not many. After a long moment, Ben nodded. "All right, you're in, but we're watching you." Lloyd let out a breath. "Thank you." As the meeting broke up, Lloyd approached Elias. They stared at each other for a long moment, and Elias waited for the anger, the resentment, the bitterness. But it didn't come. "I owe you an apology," Lloyd said quietly. "You owe a lot of people apologies." "I know, but I'm starting with you." Lloyd hesitated. "You were right about me, about everything, and I'm sorry." Elias studied him, trying to decide if this was genuine or just another play for sympathy. But Lloyd's eyes were clear, his expression open. "Apology accepted," Elias said finally. "But that doesn't mean I trust you." "I wouldn't expect you to." Lloyd walked away, and Elias sat there, feeling something he couldn't quite name. Not forgiveness, exactly, but maybe the beginning of it. Spring came late that year, the snow melting slowly, revealing the town beneath like a secret being uncovered. The cooperative thrived. New businesses opened, a bakery, a bookshop, a small inn. People who'd been too afraid to take risks before started taking them now, building things they'd only dreamed about. And Lloyd, true to his word, became just another member. He rebuilt the mercantile, but this time as part of the cooperative's network, selling goods at fair prices and sharing profits with the community. He worked hard, kept his head down, and slowly, grudgingly, people started to trust him again. Not everyone. Some never would. But enough. Elias expanded his workshop, hiring an apprentice, a young man named Daniel who'd lost his arm in a farming accident and thought his working days were over. Together, they built furniture, repaired wagons, and proved that missing pieces didn't make a person less whole. Martha's laundry flourished. She hired 2 women to help with the workload, and together they turned the business into something bigger, a place where women could work, earn fair wages, and support themselves without relying on anyone's charity. And at night, when the work was done, Elias and Martha sat together in the little room they'd made their own, talking about the future. "I've been thinking," Martha said one evening, "about expanding, maybe opening a second location." Elias raised an eyebrow. "You sure you can handle that?" "Not alone, but with help, maybe." "You've got help." She smiled.
I know. But I'm not just talking about the business. I'm talking about, she hesitated, about us, about building something together, something permanent. Elias looked at her. Are you asking me to marry you? Martha's face flushed. I don't know, maybe. Would you say yes? Probably. She laughed. That's not exactly a ringing endorsement. All right. Yes. Definitely yes. She leaned over and kissed him, and for a moment the world narrowed to just the two of them, the warmth of her lips, the way her hand cupped his face. When they pulled apart, she was smiling. We should probably make it official. Probably. They were married 3 weeks later in a simple ceremony at the community hall. Half the town showed up. Ben served as witness. Mrs. Taggart baked a cake that was lopsided but delicious. Even Lloyd came, standing at the back, his expression unreadable. It wasn't fancy, wasn't perfect, but it was theirs, and that was enough. The years passed, 1, then 2, then 5. Red Willow grew. The cooperative expanded, bringing in new members, new businesses, new ideas. The town built a school, a real one with a full-time teacher and books and desks. They paved Main Street and erected a proper town hall. They became something more than just a rough frontier outpost. They became a community. Elias's workshop became a fixture of the town. People came from miles around to commission furniture, repair tools, or just watch him work. He trained 3 more apprentices, all of them people who'd been told they weren't good enough, strong enough, whole enough. And he taught them the same thing someone had once taught him, that the measure of a person wasn't in what they'd lost, but in what they chose to build. Martha's Laundry expanded into a full cleaning and tailoring service, employing 12 women and providing steady income for families who'd once lived hand to mouth. She became a voice on the cooperative's council, respected for her fairness and her refusal to let anyone, man or woman, be dismissed or overlooked. And Lloyd, against all odds, became something close to a decent man. He never regained the power he'd once had, and he never tried to. He worked, contributed, and slowly rebuilt the relationships he'd destroyed. Some people forgave him, some didn't. But he kept showing up anyway, day after day, year after year. One afternoon, 10 years after Elias had first rolled off that train, he and Martha sat outside their workshop watching the town move around them. They'd built a small house next to the laundry, nothing fancy but solid, with wide doorways and ramps that made it easy for Elias to move through. Their workshop sat beside it, the doors open, the sound of hammering and sawing drifting out. You ever think about what would have happened if you'd left that first day? Martha asked. Elias thought about it. Sometimes. What do you think? I think I would have spent the rest of my life wondering if I'd made a mistake. She leaned her head on his shoulder. I'm glad you stayed. Me too. A young couple walked past, pushing a baby carriage. They waved and Elias waved back. He didn't know their names, but he recognized them. Newcomers, drawn to Red Willow by stories of a town that took care of its own. You know what I realized? Elias said. What? I came here looking for someone to choose me, to see me as whole. But I was looking for the wrong thing. Martha lifted her head. What should you have been looking for? A place where I could choose myself, where I could prove, not to anyone else, but to me, that I was enough. She smiled. And did you? Yeah, I did. They sat there in the afternoon sun, hands clasped, watching the town they'd helped build. It wasn't perfect. There were still arguments, still struggles, still people who judged and dismissed and refused to see past their own fear. But it was better. And that mattered. Because the truth Elias had learned, the one he carried with him every single day, was this. You didn't earn belonging by being perfect. You earned it by showing up, by doing the work, by refusing to quit when the world told you that you should. And sometimes, if you were lucky, you found people who showed up with you, who did the work beside you, who refused to quit when you faltered. People like Martha, like Ben, like the apprentices he'd trained and the customers he'd served in the town that had once rejected him, but had become, against all odds, his home. Years later, long after Elias's hair had gone gray and his hands had grown stiff with age, people still told his story. They told it to their children and their grandchildren, shaping it into something half legend, half lesson. They talked about the man who'd arrived broken and built himself whole,
The man who'd faced down a tyrant and won. The man who'd proved that courage had nothing to do with standing. But Elias knew the real story wasn't that simple. It wasn't about winning or losing. It wasn't about heroes or villains. It was about a man who'd been told he wasn't enough and had decided, stubbornly, recklessly, impossibly, to prove otherwise. Not to anyone else, to himself. And in doing so, he'd built something that lasted far longer than any building or business ever could. He'd built a life. On a cold winter morning, 23 years after he'd first rolled into Red Willow, Elias Crowe sat in his workshop, his hands wrapped around a cup of coffee, watching the snow fall outside. Martha had passed 2 years earlier, her heart giving out quietly in her sleep, and the grief still sat heavy in his chest. But alongside it was gratitude, for the years they'd had, for the life they'd built, for the way she'd seen him when no one else could. Daniel, his first apprentice, ran the workshop now, his single arm more skilled than most people's too. He'd taken on apprentices of his own, continuing the tradition Elias had started. And the town, the one Elias had fought so hard to belong to, had become a place where people missing pieces could find wholeness. Not because they were fixed, but because they were seen. Elias took a sip of coffee and smiled. His legs were gone. His wife was gone. Half his strength was gone. But he was still here, still whole, still enough. And that, in the end, was the only thing that had ever mattered. The workshop door opened and a young woman walked in, her face uncertain. She was missing her left leg, walking with a crutch, her eyes scanning the room like she wasn't sure she belonged. "Can I help you?" Daniel called from the back. The woman hesitated. "I heard this was a place where people like me could learn a trade." Elias set down his cup and rolled forward. "It is." She looked at him, at the chair, at the gray hair and the weathered face, and something in her expression shifted. Relief, maybe, or hope. "I don't have much experience," she said. "Neither did I when I started," Elias said. "But if you're willing to work, we'll teach you." She nodded, her eyes bright. "I'm willing." Elias smiled. "Then welcome home." Because that's what Red Willow had become. Not just a town, not just a collection of buildings and businesses and people trying to survive. A home. For anyone strong enough to build one. And strength, Elias had learned, had nothing to do with what you'd lost. It had everything to do with what you refused to give up.